Wait, what's this? Mace Windu's getting a painting tutorial? Well, if what you've told me is true, then you would have gained my trust. Hey guys, welcome back to Planet Mithril, and I'm back with another addition to my Star Wars Shatterpoint series, the fearless and no-nonsense Jedi Master Mace Windu, a truly beautiful sculpt which somehow simultaneously captures Samuel Jackson and the animated portrayals in one model, which has been an absolute joy to paint. Once I assembled Mace, he was primed using Citadel Mechanica Standard Grey. Take a seat, young painter, get your brushes ready, and let's get painting! Base colours. The entire head, face and fingertips were given a thorough base coat using Citadel Catachan flesh. The inner robes around the neckline were given a few thin down passes with a targeted base coat of Thrar brown. The main body of the robes was base coated with a three-part mix, equally split in thirds between Iroko, Bosch Chestnut and Blacker Brown, providing a unique, slightly more tanned tone to the robes which matches that of Windu's robes from the films. The fingerless gloves were picked out using Eclipse Grey, working around all the clone armour down the length of the arms. The clone armour itself was base coated with a 2-to-1 mix of white and graphite, given multiple thin down coats to maintain a uniform, smooth finish across the surface area. The boots and belt were then base coated with a 4-to-1 ratio mix of brown leather and black. The trousers given a base coat with a 50-50 mix of rainy grey and brown grey, again as with the clone armour with several thin down coats to reinforce consistency over the grey undercoat. The blade of the sabre was base coated using sunset purple, and the hilt carefully picked out using black metal. Skin. The skin was given a pre-shade all-over layer with an approximate 50-50 mix of Catachan flesh and Blood Reaver flesh. Now I'm opting for Citadel paints for the skin tones, as I feel these give a stronger, more natural finished look to a model skin once all the layers and highlights are in place. A shade was then applied all over the skin using Agrak Surf Shade, diluted with Lamia Medium at an approximate 2-to-3 ratio. Once the shade is in place and dry, the skin can start being layered up by gradually increasing the amount of Blood Reaver flesh in the base coat mix. This Mace sculpt has very pronounced facial features, which are very welcoming of a steady hand and precise application. I'm focusing now on creating some slight shine over the skull and separating out all the fingers at this stage also. Continue building up the layers and tone of the skin gradually until you reach a final layer stage using pure Blood Reaver flesh. At each stage, framing and focusing on areas like the brow line, defining the nose, septum and mouth, building up the shine over the rest of the skull, and defining his super sharp and pronounced cheekbones. With your layers in place, start building up the more stark and contrasting highlights with a mix of Blood Reaver flesh and Cadian flesh tone, adding the Cadian nice and gradually so as not to oversaturate any of the tones you've built up so far. Continue building up the highlights with more and more gradual increments of Cadian flesh tone added to the mix. As you can see here, I'm now mainly focusing at this stage on outlining the most prominent facial features, outlining the skull and reinforcing the shadows by focusing on where the light would naturally be hitting his most prominent features. The eye recesses were carefully picked out using Abaddon Black. These were then finished off using pallid witch flesh. Robes. A quick, targeted manual shape was applied to the inner robes with a 50-50 mix of Thra brown and brown leather. I then started layering over the inner robes with a mix of Thra brown and birch in an approximate 50-50 concentration. An initial highlight was next applied using pure birch. And finally, an extreme edge highlight applied just to the edges using white sands. A recessed shape was applied to all the inner folds of the main robes with a 3:1 ratio mix of the base coat and brown leather. You can make multiple passes with this depending on how deep and rich you want the recessed shades to be. I recommend only one pass, however, over the shallower fold below the waist. With the shading in place, you can now start building up the characteristic tones of Windu's robes by adding Thra brown into the base coat mix. This does make for a complex-ish mix, but the Thra helps bring up the tone naturally, maintain integrity, and reduces the risk of desaturation over the following highlight stages. When you're happy with your initial blocking layers, you can start gradually building up the highlights with small additions of birch into the overall mix. This will complement subtly the tones of the inner robes and boots, but again maintains the slight orangey hue to Windu's robes still in place from the base coat stage. The definition of these robes is phenomenal, so placement of these layers will come really easy and naturally with a fairly steady hand. Continue building up the highlights with more and more birch additions until you reach the final stage, whereupon I added small amounts of white sands into the mix. It's a 6-barrel mix and not easy to work with, but the best advice I can give here is to trust your judgment when it comes to the extra additions. At the final stage, I'm literally looking at just framing the upper and outermost areas of material to create a ripple of light that flows from the crest through to the recesses of each fold in material. Gauntlets and Gloves. The clone armor gauntlets were given a toning wash with some heavily diluted petroleum grey, trying to avoid this pooling as best I can. The main body of the clone armor was then slowly built back up with several coats using a 4:1 ratio mix of white and graphite, diluting this slightly to allow for an easier flow over the surface area. With a solid colour now built up again, an extreme edge highlight around the edges of all the clone armour was applied using pure white. The Republic symbol recessed on the left arm was very, very carefully then picked out using Antares red. The gloves and wrists between the plate armour were given a targeted recessed shade with a 50-50 mix of black and eclipse grey. These were then quickly given a layer with a mix of miskatonic grey and eclipse grey. leading to an extreme, quite stark edge highlight using pure Miskatonic grey, focusing on the knuckles and upended palms of the gloves here in particular. Trousers and boots. A recessed shade using pure brown grey, slightly diluted for ease of use, was applied to the recesses of the trousers. Start building up the layers again with a mix of rainy grey and nacre, again gradually adding more nacre as you continue to progress through the layer stages. Working your way up to a pre-highlight layer using pure nacre, focusing on the top of the thigh that faces upwards and the more pronounced folds around the crease in the knee. Highlights can then be applied by adding in white into the nacre, framing the shape of the leg and folds, going as bright as you feel is necessary. I recommend building up to an approximate 2:1 ratio split in favour of the nacre to avoid making this a little bit too bright. I applied another recessed shade to the boots and belt, by this time increasing the amount of black in the original base coat mix used for these areas. Wanted to maintain the rich chocolatey tone which contrasts well with the tones used for the main bulk of the robes already. The layers were built up by adding Iroko gradually into the original base coat mix. Bear in mind I'm talking about the mix used before the shade, so make sure you've still got some of this left in your palette at this stage. And again, to complement the highlights and upper tones of the rest of the model, small amounts of white sands were added into the overall mix as you progress through the highlight and extreme edge highlight stages to finish off the belts and boots. Lightsaber. Any metallic detail on the belt was carefully picked out using black metal at this stage. A shade was applied to the hilt using Citadel Nuln Oil. A very careful and quick edge highlight was applied then using Thrash Metal. The blade was slowly built up by adding white into the sunset purple base coat. Gradually adding more white, working your way to the top of the blade with each pass until you're using a mix that favours the white over the purple in an approximate 3:1 ratio. This party's over. Oh no, Mace, my friend, this party's just beginning. Providing, unlike poor Mace, you've made it through the tutorial with two hands still attached, you now have a superbly painted Jedi Master leading the charge against the threat of the Separatists for the glory of the Galactic Republic. I hope you guys have enjoyed today's video. Please like, subscribe and hit that bell for notifications, and until next time, take care and happy hobbying.